Hello and welcome to the second broadcast from the Mycenaean Broadcasting Corporation, coming to you directly from the court of popular opinion. The trial of the legendary hero of the Trojan War, Achilles, who has been accused of cowardice over his withdrawal from the combat, continues as his defence against the charge begins. He has pleaded not guilty to the formal charge, and his defence lawyer, Mr. Anthony Dancer, has vigorously cross-examined prosecution witnesses who have included Agamemnon, the king of Mycenae and marshal of the Achaean forces at Troy, and Odysseus, the well-known character whose exploits during his protracted return journey from Troy to his home at Ithaca is the subject of Homer's Odyssey. With me, attending the trial, is Professor Twaddle, a senior lecturer in classics at Nonsuch University, who has given us some interesting insights into the background to this case. Professor Twaddle, what impression have you formed concerning the nature of the evidence presented by the prosecution, and what witnesses can we expect the defence to call?
As far as I can tell, the prosecution has confined itself mainly to presenting evidence that is present only in the Iliad. The writing style of the Iliad is weighty, to say the least, and the prosecution has been careful in the way that it has extracted the facts, and in the way that these facts are presented as evidence. Odysseus gave evidence concerning Achilles' sojourn on the island of Skyros, which is not mentioned by Homer in the Iliad, but is referred to by Apollodorus, one of the sources referred to by the judge Lord Tyburn as being an acceptable source of information. As to the witnesses that the defence will call, at this stage it is impossible to speculate. The judge, Lord Tyburn, has ruled that gods and nymphs cannot give evidence, and that only human witnesses can be called. He has also demonstrated his abhorrence to hearsay.
What is hearsay evidence, and why is it frowned upon in court cases?
Bearing in mind that I am not a legal expert, I understand that hearsay is evidence of something that is said when the defendant does not have the opportunity to respond. It is seen in court cases as rumour and is considered unreliable.
Thank you, Professor. I believe that the case is about to resume in the court of popular opinion, and that the judge, Lord Tyburn, has entered the courtroom. So, without further ado, we will take you straight to the court where the defence is about to commence.
Be seated. Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye, all persons having business before his lordship. Draw near and give your attention, for the court is now in session. The case to be presented before Judge Lord Tyburn is Antipathy versus Achilles.
The prosecution has concluded its presentation, and I will now invite the defence to present witnesses. I will remind you as to my rulings following pretrial applications that sources of information concerning the actions of characters involved in this case shall be restricted to authors from the ancient Greek to the classical Roman. Evidence will be accepted only from characters who are directly involved. Authors will not be called to give evidence, and I will not accept testimony of divine characters, gods, nymphs, spectres, and other ethereal entities. I will also remind you that this is the court of popular opinion. It is the people themselves who shall give verdict in this case. I will not tolerate any attempt to sway public opinion with rumour, innuendo, or hearsay. Mr. Dancer, you may proceed.
My lord, it is the contention of the defence that the defendant, Achilles, was not acting from cowardice, but from an emotional disturbance brought about by the strain of unrelenting combat. If it pleases your lordship, I will call my first witness, Peleus, son of Achilles. State your oath.
I solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
You are Peleus, son of Achilles?
I am he.
You are the father of Achilles?
That is correct.
Who is his mother?
The Nereid Thetis.
Nereid?
A sea nymph.
Could you tell the court about the early life of your son Achilles, his upbringing, his education?
His mother, Thetis, wanted to make him immortal, so she decided to burn him in fire during the night, then rub ambrosia on him during the day. I discovered this before she had the opportunity to begin, and when I confronted her about this course of action, she abandoned him.
What did you do then?
At the time, he had the name Ligyrum, as he had not suckled from a human breast. I gave him into the care of Chiron, who gave him the name Achilles.
What care did Chiron provide for Achilles?
Chiron wanted to make Achilles tough, make a formidable warrior of him. He fed the young child on the entrails of lions and wild boars, and the marrow of bears.
How long did Achilles remain with Chiron?
Until he was 9 years of age.
What happened then?
After Helen, the wife of Menelaus, had been abducted by Paris, the prince of Troy, and war became a possibility, Thetis, Achilles' mother, heard a rumour that Calchas, the priest of Artemis, had stated that Troy would not fall without the assistance of Achilles. She feared for his life, so she dressed him as a girl and hid him among the daughters of Lycomedes, king of Skyros.
The court has heard testimony from Odysseus that Achilles fathered a child during his stay on Skyros. You are not suggesting, are you, that Achilles impregnated a woman at 9 years of age?
Achilles remained on the island of Skyros until he left for the Trojan War. I believe that he was about 13 or 14 years of age when he sired a son.
Thank you, Peleus. My learned colleague will ask you some questions.
Mr. Grime.
Thank you, my lord. Peleus, please clarify a point that I don't fully understand. It concerns the testimony that you have just given. You mentioned the actions of Thetis, Achilles' mother, and of Chiron, and of Calchas, but my question is this. Were you present when any of them said or did the things that you stated in your testimony that they said or did?
I witnessed the attempt of Thetis to burn Achilles, and I was with Chiron when he stated his intention to feed Achilles with the food that I referred to.
Were you with Calchas when he predicted that Troy would not fall without the input of Achilles?
No, I was not.
So that part of your evidence is hearsay? Objection. My lord, there is no doubt that Achilles was taken to Skyros and that he remained there until he departed for the Trojan War. All of the testimony given by this witness has been confirmed by other witnesses.
Suspend, Mr. Grime, your attempt to undermine the testimony of this witness is unworthy of a lawyer of your repute. I suspect that you are seeking to sway public opinion in an underhand manner. Desist!
Very good, my lord. No further questions.
Mr. Dancer.
If it pleases your lordship, I will call my next witness, Priam, son of Laomedon. State your oath.
I solemnly and sincerely declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
You are Priam, son of Laomedon.
I am he.
You were the king of Troy during the Trojan War.
Yes, I was.
You were the father of Hector, the marshal of the Trojan forces during that conflict.
Yes.
I understand that the subject of your testimony is of a sensitive nature, and I appreciate you coming to court to give account of what you witnessed. Could you tell the court of the combat between Achilles and your son, Hector, and what happened after?
Hector, my son, was the champion of the Trojans. He marshalled the Trojan forces and led them personally in all the major engagements. From my position on the walls of Troy, I had a clear view of the action, and in his final confrontation, he was close enough to the walls and my position for me to hear clearly what was said between him and Achilles.
Before I ask you to recount the details of that final conflict, I understand that the day before, the Achaean forces launched a major assault on the walls of your city.
That is correct. The Achaeans mustered their forces in strength and made a frontal assault. The distance between their camp and the walls of Troy was such that Hector had enough time to muster the Trojan forces and repel the enemy before they got too close. The Achaeans withdrew, but constructed a ditch and wall to establish a forward defensive barrier.
Was this defensive wall effective?
It was not. The next day, Hector led his forces against the defensive ditch and wall which he overran. He led his forces to the Achaean camp, and I saw smoke rising from close to their ships. Then, quite suddenly, the Trojan forces began to fall back. They appeared to be in disarray. I watched as they fell back towards the Achaean defensive wall. Then I recognized Achilles at the head of the Achaeans. He was personally leading the counter-attack. I then saw Achilles confront Hector, and I realized that single combat was about to take place.
What was the result of this combat?
Hector prevailed. He killed Achilles in single combat, but when he removed Achilles' helmet, he suddenly leapt back. It turned out that it was not Achilles, but an impostor, a man called Patroclus.
What happened next?
Hector stripped the armour from the body, but then the Achaeans began to push forward to retrieve the body of the impostor. A fierce struggle over the corpse ensued. I recognized Menelaus, son of Atreus, as one of the combatants. The struggle lasted for a long time. Then Achilles arrived, this time without armour. He could be clearly identified. He stood above the ditch, screaming in rage, and the Trojans abandoned the body, which the Achaeans retrieved. They took it back to their camp.
Did anything else happen that day?
There was no further fighting that day. The next morning, the Achaeans formed up and attacked in force. They succeeded in pushing the Trojan forces back, and, in some disarray, the army fell back into the city.
I understand that your son, Hector, remained outside the city gates. Is this correct?
Yes, I implored him to return to the safety of the city walls, but he remained outside. He wanted to confront Achilles in person, to fight him in single combat.
Did this single combat take place?
No, it did not. Hector remained outside the city gates whilst Achilles and his Myrmidons came forward. There was a horde of them, hundreds, perhaps over 1,000. They started to shoot arrows at him, and he realised that single combat was not what Achilles anticipated. Hector tried to escape, and Achilles and his men chased him 3 times around the city walls. Arrows were continuously fired at him, and he scrambled and ran, with Achilles and his Myrmidons pursuing him. When Hector reached the wellheads for the 4th time, he stopped, exhausted, and faced Achilles. He fought, but he was exhausted. It was Achilles who prevailed. When Hector was dead, his body was stripped of its armour by Achilles, who then encouraged his followers to stab repeatedly the dead body of my son. Achilles then cut through the tendons of Hector's heels so that he could tie the corpse to his chariot. Achilles then dragged the body face down around the walls of Troy before dragging him back to his camp.
Was this the last time that you saw Achilles?
There was no further fighting for 11 days. Each day I received news that Achilles was dragging Hector's corpse around the grave of Patroclus, his friend whom Hector had killed whilst impersonating Achilles. I could stand it no more. The distress was too much for me, and I resolved to visit Achilles myself and pay ransom for the return of my son's body. I went to the Achaean camp in company with Idios, my herald. The night came on, and we made our way, completely unseen by Achaean guards, to the tent of Achilles.
How did Achilles receive you?
He received me with respect and listened to my plea. He accepted the ransom offered and allowed me to return to Troy with the body of Hector. He also accepted my appeal to dissuade the Achaeans from continuing the conflict for 11 days, so that I could complete the funeral rites for my dead son.
Thank you. I have no further questions. My learned colleague may wish to ask you some further questions.
Mr. Grime.
What ransom did Achilles accept for the body of Hector? There were 12 robes, 12 single cloaks, 12 blankets, 12 white mantles, and 12 tunics, 10 talents of gold, 2 tripods, and 4 cauldrons, and a beautiful cup. A considerable ransom. My son was a considerable man. How would you describe Achilles' state of mind? Was he calm, or was he still angry? He appeared to me to be close to anger, but was trying to control himself. He ordered his servants to wash Hector's body and clothe it in one of the cloaks I had bought. He lifted the body onto the bier himself, and he seemed calmer, having agreed to release the body. Did you have any further dealings with Achilles after this episode? No. I saw him from afar later during the conflict, but we never met again. Thank you. I have no further questions.
Mr. Dancer.
My lord, my client, the defendant Achilles, exercises his prerogative not to give evidence. That concludes the case for the defence.
The defendant is not obliged to give evidence in his own defence, and the jury will be instructed not to give credence to his silence. I will reiterate this during my summary. I will now invite Mr. Grime to sum up the case for the prosecution. Mr. Grime!
My lord, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the name Achilles is perhaps one of the best known, best recognised names in the world. It is a name that is associated with strength, with courage, with fortitude and determination. It is a name associated with heroism, with valour and honour. Achilles is a name that rouses the heart, and, to quote from Shakespeare, stiffens the sinews and summons up the blood. Yet, when we examine the character of Achilles in some detail, we discover that this hero is not all that he at first appears to be. True, he was considered a hero by the Achaeans at Troy, and true, Calchas, the seer of Artemis, did predict that Troy would not fall without the contribution of the great Achilles. Yet, at a critical moment in the conflict, Achilles refuses to fight. He cowers in his tent. He sits by as the enemy rushes forward and overruns the defences and, very nearly, destroys the Achaean ships with fire. And when, in desperation, his friend begs him to return to the fray and save the day, Achilles not only continues to skulk in his tent, but he orders his friend, his charioteer, his subordinate, Patroclus, to dress up in Achilles' armour and impersonate the great hero on the battlefield. This order, this command given to one who is obliged to comply, led directly to the death of his so-called friend. The reason given for his abandoning his friend? A woman whom he took as a prize, having first killed her husband. He must have really loved this woman, this Briseis. She was taken from him, and he pined for her by having sex with another of his war prizes, another woman whom he raped after raging war against her home. Is that love? Not by any definition of which I am aware. If this court was a war crimes tribunal, Achilles would be convicted of rape. But this is not a war crimes tribunal. If this was the Army of the Potomac, or the Army of Northern Virginia, the Wehrmacht, or the Red Army, the British Expeditionary Force, or indeed any modern army of the last 200 years, Achilles would have been convicted at court-martial and executed by firing squad. In no circumstances would pusillanimity, such as that which has been exhibited by the defendant, be defined as anything other than the most craven, most despicable, most spineless cowardice, and I call upon you, the jury, to find the defendant Achilles guilty.
Mr. Dancer.
My lord, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have heard much during this trial from the prosecution concerning the behaviour of Achilles. There is nothing in the testimony of the witnesses that has been contended. You have, however, been party to some of the legal considerations as to the meaning of the evidence, and the prosecution has made much of the fact that in a war crimes tribunal, Achilles would be convicted of both rape and murder. But this is not a war crimes tribunal. We are not here to consider charges relating to his treatments of prisoners of war,
or civilians held under military occupation. We are convened to answer the question of cowardice, and I would argue that Achilles is not a coward. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you may recall that Achilles had been a volunteer in this conflict, if volunteer is the right word. He did not have a choice. Calchas, as we have heard, predicted that Troy would not fall unless Achilles participated in the war. He was pursued to a secret place where he was hiding and was forced and humiliated and provoked into action. Did he have a choice? No. When he was a baby, he was given a name that referred to the fact that he had never suckled from a human breast. He never tasted his mother's milk. Rather, he was abandoned by the one person who could have, should have, cared for her child, his mother. It is little wonder that Achilles yearned for the comfort of a woman, however he won her. From early childhood, he was fed the entrails of lions and wild boars and the marrow of bears. This diet was forced upon him. He had no choice. It is little wonder, therefore, that when, after 9 years of leading the Achaean army, of rousing them to battle, of inspiring the troops to ever more exhausting combat, he cracks in response to Agamemnon's quite unreasonable demand to give up the woman Briseis. In that moment, the pressure, not only of the near decade-long conflict, but of his whole life, bore down on him, crushed his spirit, and provoked him in a most uncharacteristic response. Far from condemnation, nevermore has a character needed support and understanding. As my learned colleague points out, in any modern army, Achilles would have faced a court-martial and would have been shot. But this is not a court-martial. This is the court of popular opinion. It is within the remit of this court for you, the jury, to recognise that Achilles was suffering from stress and nervous exhaustion resulting from prolonged exposure to violence and war. Even his relationship to his women, his war prizes, is a symptom of his stress, as was his treatment of prisoners of war, distressing though that treatment was. Achilles was a victim of the expectations of others, a victim of the time in which he lived. You, the jury, have it within your power to recognise that stress. It is within your power to relieve Achilles of that stress and recognise that this great hero was suffering from what is today recognised as post-traumatic stress disorder. I call upon you, the jury of the Court of Popular Opinion, to relieve the trauma suffered by this and all our heroes, our warriors, our soldiers, the guardians of our security, and no matter how distasteful their symptoms may be, return a verdict of not guilty.
Now that all the witness testimony has been heard, and both the prosecution and the defence have made their final addresses, it falls upon me to instruct you, the jury, as to how to reach your verdict. I will remind the jury that the defendant in criminal cases is not obliged to give evidence in their own defence, and no significance should be given to absence of their own testimony. As this is the court of popular opinion, you may give your verdict at any time. There is no time limit. You have heard the testimony of witnesses, and neither the prosecution nor the defence contests the actions of the accused. What is in dispute is the interpretation of this behaviour. The argument of the prosecution is that Achilles' refusal to fight was motivated by fear, and that he exhibited the classic symptoms of cowardice. The defence do not dispute the facts, but interpret his actions as symptomatic of post-traumatic stress disorder. You have also heard evidence that could support a charge against Achilles for war crimes, including rape and the murder of prisoners of war. The argument of the prosecution is that this behaviour is typical of the coward, whilst the defence argues that this same behaviour is, again, symptomatic of post-traumatic stress disorder. I must advise the jury that, no matter how repulsive you feel that these actions were, the fact that the defendant, Achilles, has not been charged with war crimes, his guilt or otherwise concerning them, cannot be taken into consideration when determining his guilt or otherwise in relation to the charge of cowardice. I will now turn the attention of the jury as to the process of declaring your verdict. If you find the defendant Achilles guilty, press the thumbs down icon below the screen. If you find Achilles not guilty, press the thumbs up icon. There is no time limit on your verdict vote. The court will now adjourn whilst the jury deliberates its verdict.
All rise.
The trial, the legal arguments, and all the witness testimony has concluded, which does, of course, bring to the end this broadcast by the Mycenaean Broadcasting Corporation. I would like to thank Professor Twaddle for his insights into the background to this trial. As the judge, Lord Tyburn, has indicated, it is now for you, the people, the jury of the Court of Popular Opinion, to decide on the guilt or otherwise of the defendant Achilles. If you believe Achilles to be guilty of the charge of cowardice, then press the thumbs down icon that you will find below the screen. If you believe him to be not guilty, press the thumbs up icon. There is no time limit on registering your verdict, so vote any time as you see fit. It is your decision.